just a tad tardy, but that happens to me sometimes. So I hope you're doing well. Ben, have you already hit that?
Just did.
Oh, okay. Well, never mind. I was going to ask a question, but I won't ask the question now. Scott, how you doing?
I'm fine, thank you.
Have you been fishing any?
No, Dan and I were just talking about it. I have not been fishing for too long of a time.
I tell you, I'm dying to go. I have not been yet this year. I was supposed to go with one of my appraisers, and it was pouring down rain that day, and we decided not to go. So I haven't been either. And sadly, I haven't been in a while. Now, I did at the AXE conference down in Bay St. Louis. We did go deep sea fishing there, and that was kind of fun. So we had a good time with that. Well, let's go ahead and get started. It's 10 o'clock, and we have several folks on watching. So I apologize for my little delay in being tardy here. But let's get rolling. Good morning. You're watching the Appraisal Report webinar brought to you by the fine folks of Appraiser eLearning. I'm your host, Bryan Reynolds. These webinars are free. They're brought to you once a month as a courtesy of Appraiser eLearning. It's our way to give back to the appraisal profession. The price is right. They're free. And if you're not able to watch the webinar in its entirety, these are recorded and they're available where you're watching us right now via YouTube. So if you haven't already done so, we recommend that you take just a second and hit the subscribe button. That keeps you in the know. It will let you know when we have a webinar. These webinars are normally the fourth Thursday of every month at 10 o'clock Central Standard Time, last about an hour. And we have the ability for you to get involved. You can type a question in and Benjamin will get those over to us. We're not seeing you real time, so I can't see your little conversation. I can't see who's in the room. So if you're saying hi to me and I don't say hi back, don't get mad at me because I can't see that. Ben will handle getting us questions as you send those. So feel free to ask questions. We'll answer as many of those as we have time allowed for. All right. Thank you for being here. And I'm happy that we have Scott Cullen, one of our regular guests. He's on with us today. And then a practicing appraiser, Dan, is on as well. Welcome to the program, guys.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here.
So before we really get into this, why don't, a lot of our viewers probably know Scott because, again, he's been on several times. But Dan, why don't you take just a moment and introduce yourself and let our viewers know who you are, where you're located, and what it is you do.
Great. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Dan Albrecht. I am a certified residential appraiser in Colorado Springs. I cover El Paso County, which is Colorado Springs and some surrounding smaller cities. And then I also cover Teller County, which is mainly a mountain community. So I have a mix of city appraisals and mountain properties, which I really love. I started my own company back in January of 2020. That is when I became a certified residential appraiser. I received my license about a year before that. So I had two mentors during that time, learned a lot of information, a lot of good stuff from them. And I am continuing to grow my business and my knowledge, and I have found a trainee that I wanted to help. I had worked with her in the past, and she is outstanding. She just got her license last week. In fact, we had a celebration dinner for her last night. So
oh, nice.
I'm really looking forward to her. She's a go-getter and very smart, very sharp.
Very cool. Well, tell her we said congratulations. We're sorry that she can't be with us here on the program. We would love to have her here as well, but my understanding was she had a conflict or was busy today. So maybe we'll bring her on another one, but tell her that we said congratulations. We're excited. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So okay. Scott, in the event someone watching doesn't know who you are, why don't you go ahead and take a moment and introduce yourself to the viewers?
Well, thanks. I'm a certified residential appraiser in Minneapolis, St. Paul market for the last 21 years. And I try to do about one appraisal a day, maybe 4 a week sometimes. And then a partner and I started Solomon, which is a suite of adjustment calculators, pretty much based on depreciated cost. We've been doing that for now about 5-6 years. So that user base continues to grow, and I get involved talking with people about that and the rest of their appraisal business from time to time. And that's how I met Dan.
Right, right. So, you know, I really just want to kind of lay the basis of how it is that with the three of us came together today to have this conversation. And I'll give a little background on it, and then we'll let Dan and Scott elaborate. Okay. Scott reached out to me out of the blue and said, "Look at this." And he had received an email from Dan, which my understanding is a user of Scott's technologies. And Dan had really just wonderful things to say in this email. He made commentary about a trainee and how the trainee had submitted their package to the state for review, and how normally that's quite the process. And in this instance, in part because of Scott's technologies, she pretty much just flew through the process, was my understanding. And I said, why don't we bring Dan on the program? Why don't we have a webinar and share this with others? Because there's some folks out there that are probably watching that may find themselves in a scenario where they're not getting adequate training. They're not getting the knowledge that they really need to be a successful appraiser. So let's talk about that a little bit. Dan, tell us what your experience has been, either personally or what you've heard of others in submitting stuff to the state, and then what the experience was for your newly certified appraiser.
Okay, great. So just a little history. While I was a trainee, both of my mentors were very good about work files. Okay, always have a work file and keep your documentation and whatnot. However, the work files really didn't contain support for adjustments. So here we have all this documentation, which is great, but what it really comes down to is having support for your adjustments. And I didn't get that. So when I applied to get my license from the state of Colorado, the process is you send them your log, they review it. And by the way, the process takes about 6 months. They review it, and then they'll pick 3 appraisals. They'll review those appraisals, and then they will ask for work files on those appraisals. Send them the work files, and then they dissect those work files. And unfortunately, the one they picked to really beat me up on did not have, this is embarrassing, it did not have support for my adjustments. I was trained by a bedroom is worth $5,000, a bathroom is worth $5,000, and GLA is always a certain percentage, and that's how I was trained. So it was a very difficult process for me. I had to go through interviews, and then I had to show them how I would arrive at those adjustments. So I ended up doing paired sales analysis, and the bottom line is it created a lot of stress for me, and it really took a lot longer than it should have. Obviously, I ultimately did take the test. I passed and got my license and moved on. I have worked with other appraisers that were trainees. They encountered the same exact scenario. And again, super stressful. I helped one of them after he got went through the interview where they wanted him to justify or support his adjustments. He actually came over and I helped him, showed him how to do it, and he submitted that information, and then he received his certification to take the test. So when Beth came to work for me, I had already been using linear regression, paired sales analysis, and that kind of information and data to support my adjustments. I then started to look around because that was time consuming and it wasn't always very clean, and it just, I felt there was a better alternative. So I looked at different tools out there, and I had decided to use Solomon SAM, which is a sensitivity analysis, and then the Solomon Sidekick. And those were beautiful tools because they were quick. I could put them in my work file. They gave me a range of adjustments that I could then fine tune based on my experience of the market. And I feel very good about my work files having the support that they need. When my trainee came to work for me, that was really the first thing that we worked on. She was great at building a very thorough work file, but as far as the support was concerned, she really wasn't up on the methods to have strong support for the adjustments in the work file. So she also began, well, first I started her with linear regression, the paired sales analysis, and she was familiar with paired sales analysis, not so much with linear regression. And then we moved her into SAM and Sidekick. And then recently we moved into the Solomon online calculator, which at first I really liked the first two tools, the SAM and the Sidekick. And I'm, I don't like change like everybody else. So when I heard about the calculator, I'm like, no, I'm completely satisfied with SAM and Sidekick. But once I started using the calculator, it just made life a lot easier. I got a lot more out of it. And again, there's other tools out there, and I did look at other tools, but for me, this was the most user-friendly and the easiest. And I know that Beth, my trainee, really enjoyed it and found it very useful. Because of that, okay, so I'll move on to Beth's experience with getting her license. When she came to work for me, she had about 250 hours of experience, but she had been in the appraisal business as an admin person for about 7 years. And with her last mentor, she, I don't know what kind of agreement she had with her last mentor, but she was there as an admin person, but she was supposed to be getting hours toward her experience log, and she wasn't getting those. And that's why she decided to come and join me. Anyways, we got her hours in. She really busted it out and submitted her application and documentation to the state. And of course, SOP, they picked 3 appraisals. And I reviewed all 3 appraisals that they picked after they picked them. And thankfully, they were all really clean appraisals. One appraisal had a revision request, and it was a nominal data entry error. It was really nothing.
Yeah, most all appraisals have revision requests these days, don't they?
Yeah.
Multiple revision requests. Thank you, AMCs.
Yes. So they picked the one with the revision request. I don't know why, but it was the one that seemed to have the most adjustments. I don't remember what our final value opinion was on it, but it required some work. And Beth sent her work file in as they requested. And she immediately, and this is my understanding, she immediately received an email from DORA, which is the regulatory committee here in Colorado, that she had a very good work file. Her support for her adjustments was very good, and they issued her certification to take her test. That is completely unknown. I've known 3 other appraisers that went through a similar experience as I had, but I believe the bottom line is it was the support for the adjustments that really pushed it through. And wow. That's truly an amazing story here. It probably knocked off 2 to 3 months, of her going through this process. So I just, I guess I was happy that you invited me into this conversation, because I think people can really avoid a lot of stress and agony. It's a stressful process, right? We all have been through this. It's stressful. But if we can alleviate some of that stress, not only for the mentors, but for the trainees, speed up that process, everybody wins. And further down the road, I know my trainee, if she ever has something called into question, honestly, she's rock solid. I truly believe that with the documentation that we have, we can defend our adjustments and we have solid reports.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's congratulations. That's a great story. And
Thank
I'm
you.
glad you were able to come here today and share that. And we're going to get to Scott in just a little bit so he can enlighten everyone as to, you know, the processes and how it works. But before we do that, I want to make something very clear to everyone watching. You know, Dan has said work file numerous times, and that's fine. I get it. But the work file is the evidence that you did the process or you did the development. Okay. And that's the real critical point. You had mentioned, Dan, one of the guys came over and sat with you so that you could kind of show them. And what I interpret by that is not show them how to put stuff in the work file, but how to show them to support an adjustment. Right.
Right.
And so, you know, if you're a trainee and you're in a supervisory environment where you're not getting guidance, Dan said he was told use $5,000, but wasn't told how do you derive that $5,000? You know, that's the critical question there is you can tell me what to use, but will you enlighten me how you know that it should be a $5,000 adjustment? And I just want to share something very quickly with everyone. Right now, you ought to be able to see my screen. And I have a copy of the current edition of Uniform Standards. It's the 2020-2021 edition, which has been extended through 2022. Okay. And on my screen, what you can see is a conversation about Standard Rule 1, which is the appraisal, which is the development. It's everything you have to do to get the number, if you will. And in this development, you can see right here, it says Standard Rule 1-1. Look at line item 437, item A. Be aware of, understand, and correctly employ those recognized methods and techniques that are necessary to produce a credible appraisal. And credible means believable. Okay. So we're to use recognized methods and techniques. We have to understand them and correctly employ them. Recognized methods and techniques. So the question is, what recognized technique are you utilizing to support your opinion of that $5,000 adjustment? Well, I'm just using it because my supervisor told me to. Well, then you're not getting adequate training. You need to figure out why the difference between a 1-car garage and a 2-car garage in this particular market has a differential of $5,000. I just had a coaching call yesterday, and the gentleman's from Oregon, and we chatted for a while, and he sent me one of his reports, and we looked at, and, you know, in his opinion, in one instance, although there was a difference in a physical characteristic of the comp to the subject, he had adequate support that the market wasn't recognizing a difference. So he has a 0 there. There's 0 adjustment. So there could be a 1-car garage versus 2-car where the market's not willing to pay more for that. And so it's not 5,000 in that instance, it's a 0. I have a market, grew up in this subdivision. It's about a $10,000 adjustment. And I used, Scott actually called me when I was working on that. We ran it through his model as well. So I've got multiple techniques, recognized techniques I've utilized. And when I reconciled it, I came into a number I'm comfortable with, but I have support for that opinion. So that's what Dan's saying. Yeah, the information in the work file is a demonstration or pointing to where it can be found. Doesn't have to be in a work file. It needs to be in a work file or a reference to where it can be found, right? That's evidence that you used and understood and employed a recognized technique. So there's multiple techniques. Dan has mentioned paired sales. He's mentioned regression analysis. Scott why don't you chime in here and tell us some other recognized techniques and what you have available to offer to folks if they're interested.
All right, thank you. The sales grid, when you think about it, the whole purpose of the sales grid is to compare the contributory value of different features in a house. All right. Contributory value is also a word used to describe, it comes out of the cost approach, the contributory value of the house as a whole to the value of the property. You start with land, and then everything else is the contributory value. Well, the contributory value is a percentage of its cost. And if you can figure out what that percentage is, now you've got a basis to get going on many of the adjustments in the sales grid. So if you have a situation where the house is worth 300,000 and the land is worth 100, the contributory value of the house is 200. If that cost to replace that house today is 400, just using some simple math, that means the market's paying 50% of the cost of that house. And the reason it's important to think about contributory value as a percentage is because now you can go to the cost manual and say, what is the cost of one more bathroom? And the cost manual says it's $12,000. Well, there is support for a $6,000 bathroom adjustment. I'm not saying it's the right number. You'll have to use other methods to confirm that, but that's one way to interpret that contributory value. If the cost of a second garage stall is $12,000 and the market's paying 50%, well, then there's your $6,000 garage adjustment. If the cost of one more square foot, now not the average cost, but the cost of one more square foot of GLA is $100, a good place to start is 50% of that one more square foot cost. So the importance of this is that you can support adjustments for several categories in the sales grid. And then you've got, at the bottom of the grid, you've got these adjusted sale prices, right? Well, now you can start with those adjusted sale prices and do things like adjusted pairs or sensitivity analysis. And if you want to confirm the results you get from those, you can use secondary data, survey data. So that's the thinking behind Solomon is you start with the easy ones, something that you can support from the cost approach on a percentage contributory value, and then go from there and work through the grid using different techniques that are all recognized in the 15th edition of the Appraisal of Real Estate, which is kind of my reference point.
Yeah, so you threw a lot out there real quick, and so I want to make it for me to understand things. I've got to make it really simple because I'm not that smart. So let's break down the theory behind your depreciated cost. Okay, let's talk about that for a minute. You know, some definitions say depreciation is a loss in value from any cause, and while it can be a loss in value, it's not always a loss in value. So I really don't like that definition. And I'll give you for instance, if we put an in-ground pool, Scott, tell everyone where you're located.
I'm in St. Paul, Minnesota, where it's cold and snowy for 4 months of the year.
Okay. So in Minnesota, if I put an in-ground pool in your backyard, or if you put one in, I don't want to pay for it. So if you called the pool guy and he came over to put an in-ground pool in your backyard, what would the cost be of, you know, an average, let's say 17 by 35 in-ground, nice pool, but not crazy, no waterfall, no, you know, jets coming up off the bottom of the pool. It's just in a pool with that. It's pretty cool. What would a typical cost of a pool be in your market?
I'm going to guess $40,000.
All right. So $40,000. The cost to put that pool in his backyard is $40,000. He writes a check, $40,000. Now here's the magical question. What's it worth? And we're not holding Scott to this. If you're in Minnesota, don't start making adjustments based on what he's saying right now. This is all hypothetical. Go ahead, Scott. What would it be worth? 40,000?
Well, in a recent case, it was worth about 12.
Okay. I'm going to round so I have easy math. All right. So I'm going to say $10,000. Okay. So everybody stay with me a moment. The cost, Scott wrote a check out for $40,000. That was the cost. What's the value of the pool? $10,000. Now I want to make this clear. He just, this is almost August. So it's hot there right now, isn't it, Scott?
Yes, very hot.
Okay. So it's hot. So Scott writes a check and the pool guy drives off and he's got the garden hose and the neighbor's garden hose and he's filling the pool. And this weekend, he's going to have a barbecue. You're all invited. Okay. We're going to have a pool party. The guy just drove off. Scott wrote him a check for $40,000. The value of the pool is what? $10,000. Stay with me. Say that to yourself. The value of the pool is $10,000. How much loss in value has there been? Zero. The pool was worth $10,000 a minute ago. Has it lost any value? No, it's still worth $10,000. So is there depreciation? Yeah, you better believe it. There's $30,000 worth of depreciation in this scenario. But it's not a consequence of a loss in value. It's only ever been worth 10. How can you lose something you never had in the first place? You could say it's a loss in cost if you want to. The rest of the definition I find in the publication Scott mentioned and other publications is spot on. And I love the rest of the definition. I think it's absolutely accurate. The remaining definition says depreciation is the difference between cost, in this case, $40,000, right? And value, in this case, $10,000. 40 minus 10 gives you 30. So that is the definition of depreciation. The difference between cost and value on the same day, right? So the interesting thing about that scenario is if you have two of the answers, you can solve for the third, right? Because it's simple mathematics. So Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's how your software works, right? If we have a garage that costs $30,000 and it's depreciated tune of 50%, as you said a moment ago, right? So 30,000 minus 15,000 equals what? 15,000. So 30,000 in this case would be the cost. Can we estimate costs? Yes, there are cost publication manuals, right? So we're going to estimate the cost of $30,000 for this new garage if it were new. And then you as the appraiser develops an opinion about the amount of depreciation. And there are depreciation tables, I believe, as well. And Scott, I'll defer to you on that in just a minute. But let's say you estimate that it's depreciated to the tune of 50%. Then it's simple math. $30,000 cost minus $15,000 depreciation gives you the contribution of $15,000. And this is a recognized technique. Remember standard 1.1a a moment ago? Employ, understand, and utilize these recognized methods and techniques. So if you have a supervisor saying, well, just put 5,000 because years of experience, that doesn't cut it anymore. I need something a little more tangible than that. So Scott, is that a fair way to say that's what you've done? You've analyzed the cost, the amount of the depreciation, and simple mathematics will tell us what the contribution is.
Right. The important thing, I think, is to do the cost approach. Pick your publisher for cost data. Do the cost approach and figure out what that depreciation is by looking at the cost approach. It will show you when that indicated value by cost approach is equal to the market value, it will show you what the effective age is, i.e. what the depreciation is. So it's important to use the same data for both calculations. One, what is the percentage of contributory value? And two, what does that feature cost? Now, interestingly, in the cost data I use, they do not have a cost for bedrooms, right? Whether it's a 3 large bedrooms or 4 small bedrooms, there's no difference in cost in the cost manual. It's not a very detailed cost manual. It also does not give us the cost of a pool. In fact, you can consider that a site improvement. So
Yes.
use contributory value of the site improvements to cover the pool. Now, we don't do only cost data, but we've got survey data that shows what a pool might be worth according to a bunch of appraisers in different climates. But the important thing is to first extract depreciation from the market using a recognized cost provider, and then use that same cost data to extract the cost of one more bathroom, one more garage stall, one more square foot of GLA, one more square foot of basement finish, one more square foot of basement size, etc. So start with depreciated cost is, to me, starting with depreciated cost is the easiest way to work through the grid using recognized methods. It's very difficult to find pairs for most things, but once you have adjusted for the things that you can, now you can use adjusted pairs to figure out some of those other details.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in just a minute, because you've actually thrown a few terms out there that folks might not be, actually Dan did as well, that some of the viewers might not be familiar with, right? He mentioned SAM a while ago, the survey method, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But guys, we're already at the halfway mark, so let me do some business here real quick. You're watching the Appraisal Report webinar brought to you by Appraiser eLearning. We're happy that you're here. These sessions are all recorded. They're on YouTube. If you want to go back and look at one of our prior episodes, they're all right there for you via YouTube. Just go to YouTube, Appraiser eLearning, and you'll see the whole library of content. We do ask that you go ahead and hit the subscribe button right now, because although we have a monthly webinar series, normally the fourth Thursday of every month, we also have what's called special edition webinars. And those can occur at any time. I mean, when Perea came the law of the land, we grabbed up a bunch of industry leaders and had a webinar moments after it occurred. And we broadcast that live, and then it was obviously available for recording as well. So you never know when we may have a special edition webinar. We have those on a regular basis, and I'll just call those kind of a pop-up webinar. They can pop up at any time. So if you hit the subscribe button, you'll be in the know when those occur. Finally, if you have any questions, feel free to type those into the chat. Benjamin will get these over to us, and we're happy to answer any questions that you may have on Scott's products or Dan's experience with using that or other recognized techniques or methods. We're happy to help if we can. So feel free to shoot us over a question and we'll go for there. And then finally, if you would like to be on a webinar or you know of someone that you think would make a good guest, please reach out to Ben Maxwell, and I'll ask Ben to put his contact information in the chat for our viewers to see. Reach out to Ben Maxwell and let him know that you're interested in participating. And we would love to have you on the program. We've had not just industry leaders. We've had, Fannie Mae was on last month. We've had representatives from Freddie Mac, the Appraisal Foundation, the Appraisal Subcommittee, investigators, lenders. We've had a whole host of folks, but we've had regular, everyday boots on the ground appraisers as well. And I love to have you folks on because you're the ones out there beating the streets and measuring the houses and doing what we do in this profession. So we love to have appraisers on as well. All right, so let's get back to the subject matter. Now, Dan, you started out by saying that you were using SAM and Sidekick, and then you've moved over to Solomon, which is the whole array of tools Scott has. And you mentioned linear regression. So are you doing some other things too, or has your office pretty much just started using Scott stuff exclusively?
So we are using the Solomon tools exclusively now. At one point, I was using a Spark tool that would kind of do a sensitivity analysis, and once in a while I'll do that. If something doesn't look quite right, I'll double check it with that, or I might even run another SAM analysis on it, sensitivity analysis. But as far as using like linear regression and Scott, help me out here. What was the other one with linear regression that Tim Anderson had talked to us about? We could add another line to the
Right.
chart. Gosh, it escapes me now, but and I really didn't understand it, so I didn't use that a whole lot. Anyhow, to answer your question, Brian, yeah, we're pretty much solely using the Solomon tools. And if I can add a comment here to trainees, should they be called to support their adjustments by their regulatory body, telling them that your sales grid is your paired sales analysis doesn't go over well. So yeah, I found that out the hard way. So you don't want to do that.
Yeah. That's not really a paired sales analysis. That's
No.
a cop-out answer, just like
Yes.
saying, I'm making that adjustment based on my opinion. Well, what are you basing your opinion on? Years of experience. That doesn't cut it anymore. That's the appraisal community's dirty little secret, I guess. And maybe it wasn't a dirty little secret, but it was used for decades. And to be fair, I think appraisers try to do the best job they can, and they are analyzing differences and trying to draw conclusions, but it's all done up here, and they, when you're asked, well, show me, Dan, if you use paired sales, let me see them.
Yep.
Well, I don't know if I'm find them right offhand, right? So that doesn't, if you're using paired sales, that's fine. Scott and I did a little session on virtual paired sales one time, which was pretty interesting stuff. We had a conversation last night on Clubhouse, and we said, as an appraiser, you can do almost anything. The key is that you need to produce credible assignment results and not create a misleading report. With scope of work, extraordinary assumptions, and hypothetical conditions, you can do almost anything. And so we were having a conversation about rents and using comparable rents. And I equate that to if you're using a year-old sale or an 18-month-old sale in most markets, maybe not all, but most markets right now, there's a scarcity of supply, right? So folks are making market condition adjustments or time adjustments. Shouldn't the same be said for rents? If you've got a year-old or 18-month-old rent, well, if they negotiated that rent 12 months ago or 18 months ago, if that property were to go up for rent today, would it be at the same amount or would it be at a higher rate? And so you could say, well, let's just explain the facts here. It rented 18 months ago at $500 a unit. But if it went for rent today, I think it'd be a little higher because everything else being offered is higher, and a rent that occurred last month was higher, and a rent that occurred last week was higher. So it's reasonable to expect that if that one re-rented today, it'd be at a higher price point. And there's nothing wrong with doing that, again, if you communicate what you're doing in the analysis. So Scott, does your product account for a time adjustment or a market condition adjustment? We'll start with that.
Well, we do have one calculator that applies a percentage change to comparables, but it does not figure out what that percentage is, right? That's two different things.
Right.
So the way to figure out what the percentage change is, there's several ways to do that. I think we had a webinar a while back with Tim Anderson where we had like 5 different ways. But
wow.
George Dell, who's an expert especially in time adjustments, I believe, uses single variable regression, comparing just sale prices with closed sale dates, and he figures out a daily dollar per day change. I prefer grouped data. In other words, I'll take my criteria for the comps in the report, and I go back 1 year and I have that group. And if that group has a median price of 300 and that same group 1 year prior, I only changed the dates, had a median price of 290, Well, now I've got a $10,000 difference in the median, and whatever 10,000 divided by 290 is will be my percentage. And then we take that percentage, if it's 9%, whatever it happens to be. In our little calculator, all it really does is do the subtraction to get the interval in days between two dates. And then it applies that annual percentage to those number of days, because an interval of 185 days is half a year, right? An interval of 30 days is 1/12 of a year. So it'll help. It doesn't do it from beginning to end, because that would require local sales data to be imported into the tool. And there are tools that do that. I know Dan just mentioned Spark. Spark has a tool where you dump a whole bunch of MLS sales into their program, and it will do a time adjustment and several other things based on MLS data. So the answer is yes, we can do some calculations, but we do not touch MLS data. There's no need to set up, for instance, our program will work in any territory in the country. It doesn't have to be mapped into an MLS system, but you do need to do the work of figuring out what that percentage is.
Yeah. So you mentioned one way to do that via group sales. Let's just say I have several properties that have resold, and we're finding that a lot now. Somebody bought a house a year ago, and they say, "My God, I can make some quick money because the market is so scarce right now." Or maybe they bought a year and a half ago, and they turn around and sell it. They flip it, and they really haven't done anything to the house. So what a great sale to extract data out of. You take what it sold for today versus what it sold for back then, do a little subtraction, do a little dividing, and presto, you have an adjustment dedicated to time. If they didn't do any modifications, the difference in those prices are all attributable to time, right? So you can extract a percentage out of there. So let's say I do that multiple times and I reconcile, and I say, okay, well, I'm going to use 6%. So what you're telling me, Scott, is that I could put 6% in your software, and it would spit out what the result would be for all the sales I'm wanting to use. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Very cool. Very cool. So both of you have mentioned SAM multiple times. And I just want to give full disclosure, be transparent. I've got about that much little percent of SAM that Scott and I worked out. But he mentioned SAM, he mentioned Sidekick, he mentioned survey. You mentioned survey a moment ago, Scott. And one of the things I thought that was interesting is that you said, you'll use your Solomon calculator. In a minute, we want to put up, or you give information where folks can get more information on that if they're interested, right? But you use Solomon to get all the easy adjustments, you said. And then if you had one or two items that you were struggling with, maybe you use SAM, or maybe you use a survey technique. So take a couple of minutes. We broke down what the depreciated cost analysis was. In theory, we talked about, it's merely the difference of what something costs less its depreciation, and it gives you that answer of the contribution of that amenity, right? We've got that. But what is SAM and what is a market survey technique? Let enlighten our viewers on that a little bit.
Okay, I'll start with the survey. The basics is from 1906. There was a scientist named Francis Galton who made a discovery back in 1906. It's been named the wisdom of crowds. And Galton is a pretty smart individual. He is the one who coined the term median for central tendency. He is one of the early developers of regression. So he does know his stuff. He wasn't a statistician, but one of his pupils became the first college level stats professor. So Galton was one of the beginners. And what he found is that if you have a certain type of question, the question has to have a number for an answer. And if you have a certain group of people, in other words, it's got to be a group of at least 30 people, they have to be completely separated from each other. They can't see what other people are answering, and they have to have independent experience with that question. If you get all those answers and divide it by the number of answers, First of all, you total up the answers and divide it by the total number, you'll get a better statistic or a better answer than if one expert tried to figure out that answer. So we use that for things like, what is the value of an in-ground pool in a mild climate? What is the value of an in-ground pool in a cold winter climate? And it's based on an average pool by price range of houses. So that's one example. Another one is a busy road. What is the impact of a busy road on a standard house? And interestingly, what we found is that prior to COVID, that busy road adjustment was higher than after COVID. And I don't think it was necessarily COVID. I think it was what you were talking about earlier. There was such a shortage of supply that people will put up with things that they wouldn't have before. They wouldn't buy a house on a busy road. But if the only option is a house on a busy road, they'll buy the house on the busy road. So
now, wait a minute. Let's talk about this for a minute, because that's very interesting. So I want everybody to understand that, you know, functional obsolescence, external obsolescence is something different than physical deterioration, right? Physical deterioration is the normal wear and tear, right? These glasses are going to wear out at some point and fall apart or break, right? The house is going to depreciate the more you walk on the floor coverings, the more rain, snow, wind that hits the roof covering. It's going to eventually deteriorate, right? But why don't we call it physical obsolescence? Why do we call functional and external obsolescence? And yet when we get into the physical form of depreciation, we call it physical deterioration or physical depreciation, right? The reason why is because the obsolescence is viewed through the eyes of the typical market participant. For instance, many years ago, you know, the old houses had those real high ceilings in it. And what did people do? They started lowering this. Look at all that heat we're losing up there, Scott. So they put drop tile ceilings in. Most new houses are built with 8-foot ceilings. Why do I need a 20-foot ceiling, right? So they put these drop ceilings in, and they saved in their mind, you know, the heat loss of all that air going up to the top of the ceiling. And then what happens? A few years later, people would go in these same houses and say, wonder what's above this drop tile. I love the architectural style of the big high ceiling. And we have high efficiency furnaces now. We have, you know, triple pane windows now. Let's take that out and have the high ceiling. The internet, when the internet first came out, if you were a hotel and didn't have wires running in your walls so that you could plug up an RJ45 cable for internet, you were functionally obsolete. Now, if you're a hotel with wires running in the wall, you're functionally obsolete. Why? Because of wireless, right? So things can change that quickly. And it's a matter of preference. You know, external is outside your property lines that may negatively impact the value. So you back to a cemetery. Is that external obsolescence? Well, for me, it's quiet neighbors. That doesn't bother me, right? But to some people, they may be creeped out. Oh gosh, I won't even consider buying that house, or I want a big discount. And so what Scott's saying is, historically, in many areas, if you front it or back to a well-traveled street, the market was expecting some sort of discount for that, right? They didn't want to pay what they would pay for a house that didn't have that external influence. But you're saying now, probably due to the scarcity of supply, they're more willing to accept that. It's kind of like a galley kitchen. You know, if you had several choices in a subdivision, that house with the galley kitchen would probably be the last to sell, right? Because people want the open concept these days. But when you have such a scarcity of supply, buyers are more willing to accept that galley kitchen, or more willing to accept that well-traveled street. So your market survey is revealing that now, huh, Scott, that there's really not much of adjustments or any on those well-traveled.
There was still an adjustment, but it was like 20% lower. It went from 5.5% to 4.5%, something like that.
Wow.
So
That's very interesting. And so, you know, as the supply starts to come back, if it ever does, which it probably will, but as the supply starts to come back up and we start to maybe get in balance again, you probably need to run another survey.
That's right. Well, the other
Interesting.
question was about SAM, and that's
Yep.
Brian's name for something, sensitivity analysis method. Interestingly, in the Appraisal of Real Estate 15th, it says that matched or paired sales and adjusted pairs are subsets, or there are a type of sensitivity analysis. I never knew that. So sensitivity analysis is an umbrella term. But I'll lay out the scenario for you. Let's say that you are you've completed all your adjustments in the grid, and you've got several different ages of your comparables. And you can see that the adjusted sale prices tend to be moving with the age of the house. After adjustments, the older houses look like they're less valuable than the newer houses. So there is a way to, with one of our tools, to input the ages of those houses and the adjusted sale prices, and it will instantly plot a scatter plot and show you what that relationship is. It might be a very horizontal line, meaning that there's no relationship, therefore do not adjust for age, and keep that in your work file to say, this is why I did not adjust for age. Age is not affecting the value. Or it'll say something like $250 per year, and there's a 78% correlation between the age and the adjusted sale price. So that's the SAM. Now we just call it sensitivity analysis. That's kind of the professor's term for it, sensitivity analysis. It also works for site size. Sometimes site size makes a difference, sometimes it doesn't, but it's a way for you to do the other adjustments first, and then either give 0 adjustments for differences or give it a square footage adjustment, whatever that sensitivity analysis tells you to do.
Very cool. Very cool. Dan, let me ask you, we're winding down. We've only got a few minutes left, but you know, it's great that you have a tool that you are excited about, you feel comfortable with, that you know it helps you support your opinions and conclusions, right? You've mentioned some other things you've used as well. Sounds like you're happy with Scott's product. So
Yep.
not only is it giving you, you know, peace of mind that you feel good about your adjustments, the information you put in your work file. Talk about time. Has it been a time saver, or does it take you more time to run everything through the calculator and get these results?
That's a great question. When I first started using the Solomon calculators, the suite, it did take a little bit of time to get like my multiplier down, which is, you know, you have to figure out your multiplier and things of that nature. But once you do that, it's super fast. And when I was doing the linear regression, you know, I would have to export stuff into an Excel sheet. Then I would have to put it into columns, get it organized, and then I would run the analysis. And that was really time consuming. So this tool is so much faster. And then you can print a copy of it and just shove that right into your work file under your adjustment support file. And it's quick. It's really fast.
So if I put the new Dan that uses Solomon up against the old Dan who's trying to use paired sales analysis or maybe even regression, right? And I had a stopwatch and I said, all right, here's a property. It's a rural property, right? It's a custom built home. Because let's face it, if you're in a tract subdivision, you may have good data to try and do a pairing of data, but it's even hard then, because trying to find 2 properties that are almost identical, except for only one difference that recently sold, that you can put them side by side and go, it's almost impossible to do that in any environment these days. It's not impossible. I said, it's nearly impossible, right? I've got one great subdivision that I can do that pretty well in, but that's a rarity. But let's say you're out in a rural setting. You certainly don't have that. You have a custom built home, right? And so I hit my stopwatch and say, go. And Dan 1 is using paired sales. Dan 2 is using regression analysis out here in this rural setting. Good luck with that. And Dan 3 is using Solomon in the suite of products that Scott has, who's going to be faster?
So as I mentioned early on, that I do a lot of mountain properties. You're not going to find even close pairs. I mean, it's difficult. In those situations, those assignments, I can't even imagine now trying to do paired sales analysis or the other types of analysis. I mean, I'm saving at least 50% of my time easily by using these types of tools.
Yeah. Well, Scott, why don't you, in our closing moments here, why don't you let folks know if they're interested in finding out more about you and or your products, where do they go? Is there a way that they can sample the product, or, give us a little insight in the product itself and how we get it?
Okay. It's solomonappraisal.com. And there is a free 14-day trial that's available. My email address, scullen2@comcast.net. That's SCULLEN, the number 2@comcast.net.
Guys, thank you very much for being here. Dan, thanks for sharing your story. Tell Beth we said congratulations. That's very exciting that she is newly certified. And it sounds like you have set her up for success. She flew through the board processes, so that's great. And so congratulations to you and her. Scott, as always, thank you for being here. I look forward to seeing you live and in person somewhere around the planet, hopefully really soon. Dan, if somebody wanted to reach out to you, sometimes folks are apprehensive of reaching out to, the guy. So they might be a little apprehensive of contacting Scott. Oh, he's going to try and sell me the product. And what I want to know is I want to talk to an actual user. I want to talk to Dan, and maybe he can show me how this thing really works and get some insight. How could somebody reach out to you if they wanted to pick your brain, Dan?
Absolutely. Anyone is welcome to contact me. The easiest way to contact me is to email me at Dan@Albrecht, and that's ALBRECHT, appraisals, LLC.com.
Thank you very much. And Benjamin, if you could put that up maybe in the chat thread as well, they will have his email and can get in touch with him. Thank you very much. And then Mr. Scott Cullen, if somebody wants to reach out to you and talk to you, which I give your number out all the time, so I hope you don't get a lot. I hope they're not calling you all hours of the day or night. But if somebody wants more about your information, what's your website? And then number two, if they want to reach out to you one more time, let them know how they can reach you.
Okay, solomonappraisal.com, just SOLOMON, appraisal.com is the website, and my contact information is there. My email address is the best way, SCULLEN, the number 2@comcast.net.
Thank you guys both very much for being here. And guys, if you're at a conference or a seminar or at a function, you see Scott, go up and chat with him. He's one of the nicest guys on the planet. He's not paying me to say that. He just really is. He's a genuine guy. He cares about the appraisal profession. Scott, tell him how you came up with this. Wasn't this just you were doing something for yourself and it worked, and you're like, hey, other folks might be interested? I mean, tell that real quickly before we sign off.
Well, I was trying to understand multiple variable regression. I very much wanted to support my adjustments, and I kept on coming up with goofy answers that I knew weren't right. And I tried a couple of different teachers. One of them was a grad student from the U of M, and he said I had a sample problem. And the next person I talked to was a friend, and he said, I think this doesn't work as well for this sample. There must be something, wrong. And I think really in retrospect, what was wrong is that we're trying to force regression into the sales grid. And that's a different story, but his name is John. He became my partner. He was the one that looked at my desk and said, what's that book? And I said, that's the cost manual. And he said, why don't we use cost as a benchmark? And he's a very smart guy who's not an appraiser, but he thought the answer might be somewhere besides in the MLS data And we just figured out, well, what do you know? It works pretty well if we just figure out what percentage of cost the market is paying and applying that to the costs. And anyway, he's been instrumental in developing the actual software, but he was the first one to tune me into depreciated costs. I started reading about it, and it's kind of interesting that a set of eyes from outside the industry sometimes sees things differently than we do from the inside.
Yeah, and the wonderful thing about it is Scott kept an open mind and said, hey, maybe there is a better way to do it, right? And we all need to do that as human beings. Certainly as appraisers, we need to keep an open mind, because one thing's for sure, change is going to occur whether we want it to or not. And you can resist it and put your head in the sand, or you can open your arms and embrace it and see where there are opportunities for you in change, because change is going to happen. If you don't believe me, look in the mirror. Change is going to occur sooner or later, right? So again, Scott Cullen, Dan Albrecht, thank you very much for being here. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been watching the Appraisal Report webinar brought to you by the fine folks of Appraiser eLearning. If you need some education, please remember us. These webinars are brought to you free as a way to give back. If you'd like to be on the program, reach out to Benjamin Maxwell and we will make that happen. Until next time, make a lot of money, stay safe out there, and happy appraising.